This is Chthonia, the world of the dark feminine. Hello and welcome to Chthonia, the podcast dealing with the dark feminine. I'm your host, Breach Burke. This week we're going to continue our Navadurga series, and we are going to talk about the Navadurga who is known as Kushmanda. Now, if you recall from the previous 3 episodes, we started with Shailputri, who ends up representing the root chakra, the Muladhara. You have Brahmacharani, who will represent the Svadhisthana, or the second chakra. And then last time we had talked about Chandraganta, who was representation of the Manipura chakra. So it stands to reason that we are now getting to the Anahata, or the heart chakra, and that, of course, is the realm of Kushmanda. Now, the Kushmanda has a very interesting role. She, again, as we are seeing these as the different manifestations of Parvati in particular, Kushmanda is the Shakti of the sun god Surya. Okay. Now, this is quite important, actually, because the idea of a Shakti, just for those who may not be familiar with this concept, every major deva or god in Hinduism. Now, we're talking, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. Okay, they are considered to be the trideva. Brahma being the creator, Vishnu being the preserver, and Shiva being the destroyer. Okay, and recognize that all 3 of them take on various roles. Like, while Vishnu is a preserver, avatars of Vishnu can be destructive because they need to be, because they may be fighting against some kind of an enemy that some of the other gods can't fight against. So he'll take on these very bizarre forms that usually these demons are granted a boon of some kind, the Ashuras, where they can't be killed except, somebody standing on, 1 foot between night and day, and not animal and not person. And, they're like some weird thing where there's some weird loophole that this avatar of Vishnu ends up usually presenting themselves as. So we talk about, those particular avatars, but we also talk, all these different manifestations, usually of Brahma, Vishnu, or Shiva. But also of the grahas. So the sun is a graha. It is considered to be one of the planets that is associated with Vedic astrology, one of the traditional ones. There's Surya, who's the sun, and is also considered to be the king of the solar system. Okay, and with that, the queen is Chandra, or the moon, and you have Buddha, which is Mercury. You have Shukra, which is Venus. You have Mangala, which is Mars. You have Brihaspati, which is Jupiter, and then you have Shani, which is Saturn. Okay, and those are the traditional ones. Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, that they're not part of the traditional. There are some versions of Vedic astrology that actually use those planets, but that's not part of the traditional grahas. So all of the grahas are also honored, and pujas are performed to them as well. So what we see here, when we talk about somebody being the Shakti, this is the feminine force that is behind the deity or the planet, or whatever this force is that we tend to perceive as masculine in some fashion. Usually, these particular forms of them, these feminine forms, are the Shakti, because the Shakti is the pure consciousness. If we go back to the expression, Shiva without Shakti is Shava. Okay. Shava is corpse. Okay. So, in other words, Shiva's the whole life, the embodiment, the abilities of Shiva, I guess you could say, his whole consciousness and his work in the universe comes from Shakti, comes from his Shakti. Who's usually seen as his wife. Okay. And again, Shakti is also often known as Sati or as Parvati. She's the spouse of Shiva. But Shakti is not limited to that. Shakti is a term that is used for for the consciousness. In this way of thinking, every human being, Okay, and perhaps every living thing has a Shakti. You have your life force. In Tantra, this is seen as the Kundalini energy that rises from the base of the spine, which is where Shakti resides. And it's seen as kind of a serpent that rises up to the top of the head to meet Lord Shiva around the area of the Ajna chakra, or the third eye. So, and when people have a Kundalini awakening, that's exactly, they experience that type of thing. The Kundalini awakening is where you suddenly feel the shot from the base of the spine, and it just goes up and it connects. And it's not only an energetic thing that can rock your body, in a, make you feel like you have like this, this fiery earthquake going on in your body. But it also has this like effect of immediately like sort of, clearing the consciousness, clearing the mind, getting rid of all the dross, getting rid of all the analytical thoughts and all of the stuff that, and then just kind of putting you in the place of where things are without all of that, all of that obscures the world that's beyond Mahamaya, which is the illusion, the illusion of separateness. Okay. So Kundalini Shakti, and as I've said a million times in all of these, and probably those of you who are regular listeners are sick of me saying it, but it's, the Shakti is you have to be very careful dealing with it. I think it's important for people to connect in with their Shakti. That said, like a lot of things, a lot of, strong energetic forces, you want to be careful how you use it. Okay. So Kushmanda. Now, with this explanation as the Shakti as the power behind the deity, okay, of whatever type of deity we're talking about, or avatar of a particular deity, the Shakti of the sun, okay, the actual sun, is Kushmanda. So Kushmanda is... so the way she's described, now I'm going to read a description of her this one's actually, I liked this one from rujaksharatna.com on Kushmanda Devi. And it says, Ma Kushmanda, the fourth avatar of goddess Durga, is worshipped on the fourth day of Navaratri. She rules your heart chakra, ruled by Narayana. Her name means the cosmic egg. Okay, I'm going to talk about that. And she is considered the creator of the universe. As per the Hindu mythology, Lord Vishnu was able to start creating the universe when Ma Kushmanda smiled like a flower which blossomed with a bud. She created the world from nothing at a time when there was eternal darkness all around. The Svarup of Ma Durga is the source of all. Since she created the universe, she is called Adi Svarup or Adishakti. Okay, now calling her Adishakti or Adi Parashakti, that's really what's key here. Because the Adishakti, anybody who knows anything about Tantra, or even if not, you may have heard this term. The Adishakti is the Shakti before the Shakti, if you will. It's like the Primal Shakti. And so this is a Shakti that has to do not only with what powers the universe, but also with the creative force. Okay. Now, one thing I want to do in this podcast, because I found this very interesting as I was reading up more on Kushmanda as a particular, the Shakti of the sun. And as we see, she is placed in the heart. So the idea of the radiant center of your being as being the heart chakra or the Anahata. She is, there's a lot, what I want to do is compare the creation myth that I'm about to read to you here from the Hindu. And then I want to go back and I want to look at the one that we're familiar with the most in the West, especially if you practice Western monotheism in whatever form. Okay. Okay, so here's the way the story goes. It says, once there was a complete darkness all around. A divine formless light spread everywhere, lighting up the void darkness in all directions. The light assumed a form of a goddess, and she was goddess Kushmanda. Ku means little, Ushma means warmth or life energy, and Anda means cosmic egg. When she smiled, the light assumed the shape of an egg and turned into a habitable universe. All the material planets and galaxies started to spring up. Then she caused the planets full of bright light and heat to emerge. Those planets became known as suns that sustain the innumerable lives on different planets. The suns became the source of energy on all those planets in different galaxies, but she became the source of the suns. Okay. After that, she created a pitch-black goddess from her left eye. The black goddess had 10 faces, 10 arms, 10 feet, 30 eyes, 50 fingers, and 50 toes. The goddess was Mahakali, who was seated on a burning funeral pyre with a cleaver, trident, discus, arrow, shield, severed head, skull cup, conch shell, crossbow, and a club. Okay, so this is Mahakali. That's this sort of magnified form of Kali that we see. Next, she created a ferocious goddess from her third eye. That goddess with the complexion of lava and had 18 arms. It's really weird. I once had a vision of a goddess with the complexion of lava, but anyway, we won't get into that here. She was named Mahalakshmi, who was in saffron clothes with a warrior's armor, seated on a lotus, and roared ferociously. Okay, so Mahalakshmi, who we think of as the goddess of wealth, I think I had said at one point that it's very rare to see a form of Mahalakshmi that is ferocious. Well, here it is. And this is where, by the way, those who followed the series I did on the Ashtamatrikas, or the 10, mothers, as they were, who are also Shaktis of various avatars of Vishnu or Brahma or Shiva. Mahalakshmi, when you recite the Sri Devi Khadgamala Stotra, which is basically the mala of swords is what that means. And it is it's very, very tantric stotra that one does when worshiping the Sri Chakra. And so what it is it's mentioning not only all of the great powers that are bestowed by Lalita Tripura Sundari, who is the main deity associated with the Sri Chakra. And of course, there's aspects of Kushmanda that are also part of Tripura Sundari. As we know, all these the separations between these deities, there's a lot of overlap, and to talk about them as separate, they're not really separate, but we're trying to highlight certain aspects here. But within the Sri Devi Khadgamala, they say Brahmi, Maheshwari, Komari, Vaishnavi, Varahi, Mahendri, Chamunde, and Mahalakshmi. Most people will know of Narasimhi as being the last one, also known as Pratyangira, as the eighth. But instead, what we have here is Mahalakshmi, and it's probably this form of Mahalakshmi who is part of because she is a Shakti of a very powerful Shakti. The sun, of course, is what, the influence of the suns are what allows life to flourish. So it's not surprising that she is associated with this particular function. Now, it says, okay, so first she creates Mahalakshmi, okay? Then she creates Mahasarasvati with the complexion of milk from her right eye. Mahasarasvati has 8 arms and 3 placid eyes. She wore white clothes and had a divine crescent on her forehead and other weapons like a trishul, discus, pestle, arrow, shell, bell, bow, and a plowshare. Now, Mahasarasvati, that's an interesting way of conceiving of her, because Mahasarasvati usually is thought of as carrying a veena, which is an instrument, a stringed instrument. And she is usually associated with knowledge, the kinds of knowledge that one learns, music, art, poetry, dance, all of the kinds of, the kinds of book learning that one has, knowledge of the Vedas, all that comes from Mahasarasvati. So this particular version of her is not, is a little more primal, I guess we could say. After Mahasarasvati, goddess Kushmanda created a man with 5 heads and a woman from the body of Mahasarasvati. The man had lotus, divine books, rosary, and a water pot. Okay, so here's where we see the books come in. She named him Brahma. Okay, so Brahma comes from her as well. The woman who had 4 arms and was in the white sari with a god, a rosary, a book, and a lotus was named Sarasvati. Okay, so this is the Sarasvati. As opposed to the Mahasarasvati. In the same way, she created a man and woman from Mahalakshmi and named them Lakshmi Vishnu. Okay, so in other words, there's this, there's Shiva Shakti, there's Lakshmi Vishnu, and then she says she has 8 hands in which she holds a kamandal, a bow, arrow, a jar of nectar, amrit, a discus, a mace, and a lotus. And in one hand, she holds a rosary which blesses her devotees, which the Ashtasiddhis, the 8 siddhis, and Navnidhis. She is also known as Ashtabhuja. She has a radiant face and a golden body complexion. Ma Kushmanda represents Anahata Chakra in spiritual practice. Divine blessing of Ma Kushmanda helps you fulfill your desires. She brings enemies into your goodwill. Ma brings light into darkness and establishes harmony in your life. Okay, so as we can see, she's very much connected with light. She's connected with the light that comes out of void. So there's something primal about her. If we compare this to a Greek creation myth, which is the idea of, again, most creation myths are interesting because they all start with the idea of coming out of void, okay? Coming out of just complete, and it's not even just darkness, it's complete nothingness, okay? Because even in darkness, it's not necessarily nothing. I mean, it's just literally the nothingness of the universe. Now, in the Greek one, we see what this void existing is sort of in the form of chaos. Okay, and out of chaos emerges 5 deities. And those 5 deities in the Greek are Tartarus, Erebus, Nyx, Gaia, and Tartarus and Eros. Okay, and if we look at those particular deities, so Gaia, of course, is the earth itself. But when we look at Erebus, that is the gloom, the shadowy gloom of the underworld. Okay. When we talk about Tartarus, we're talking about the depths. I mean, the absolute blackest depths. When we talk about Nyx, we're talking about the goddess of night. When we talk about Gaia, we are talking about, obviously, the earth. And then when we talk about Eros, we are talking about, in this case, the primordial Eros, which has to do with this drive to create, with this sort of primal ecstasy or this drive to create. And Eros being the force that moves within the darkness, to actually, help manifest creation. Okay, so again, and then if we look at the biblical story of creation, I'm actually going to just read that passage from the New International Version of the Bible, and this is purely for comparative purposes, so we can talk about this. It says. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, darkness was all over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Okay, now notice what happens here. Okay, God speaks a word. Okay, when he speaks the word, and first of all, you're dealing with a masculine deity here. Okay, but there's a word that's spoken, and then something comes from the word, okay? God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning the first day. Okay, so what's the first thing he does? He creates this kind of separation, okay, between, separating dark and light. And God said, "Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water." So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it. And it was so. God called the vault sky, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. And God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let a dry ground appear." And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and gathered the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Okay, and notice that it was good too. Okay, and then God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants, trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it according to their various kinds." And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and morning the third day. So we go on, okay? God says, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate day from night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times, days, and years." Okay, so there's measurement there, right? Which in the Greek would have been the function of the Titan Krios, who deals with the horizon and also deals with measurements. "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth." And it was so. God made 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. Now that's where the sun and the moon come from, right? He also made stars. God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on earth, to govern the night, day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. So now we're at the 4th day. And then the 5th day, we have the water that teems with living creatures. And, and he says he blesses them and says, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the water in the seas and let the birds increase on the earth." And it says, "And God let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, livestock creatures that move along the ground, wild animals, each according to its kind." Okay? And then finally in 26, God says, "Let us make mankind in our image and likeness." Well, now here's the plural, Elohim form, and that's a whole separate discussion, is whether we're talking about one or we're talking about many. "So they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds in the sky." Okay, Now, that's the other thing, too. Let us make mankind in our image and likeness that they may rule, okay? So there's this conception that humans are there to have dominion over nature, okay? So that's, point that it's worth noting. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And he tells them to be fruitful and multiply. Okay. And this was on the 6th day. Now, there is a second Adam and Eve story, and that's the one with the garden and this idea of that this actual separation of categorization of things actually comes from the eating of the forbidden fruit, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? Now, I mention all of these things in connection to the story of Kushmanda, because how does the universe start here? Okay, we start with a void, okay? We start with light coming into the void. There are no words spoken in Kushmanda's creation, okay? And even in other places in the Vedas, you don't have this idea of the spoken word. You don't really hear about the idea of silence being broken until we get to stories of Lord Shiva. And Lord Shiva is, creates the sutras. It's the letters of the Sanskrit alphabet, which are actually part of a chant, which I've mentioned before, called the Maheshwara Sutras. And this was a way in which a world that was silent became finally filled with sound, and that's where, and with language, and with that ability to communicate and for the mind to work in the intellect to work in its ways. But we see that that's not primal. Okay, it's not primal in the Greek either. Now, there's many more mythologies around the world besides the biblical and the Greek. Most of my studies in the Western Near Eastern traditions and also in Hinduism. So this is why I'm focused on those. There are many other creation stories, but you will see even creation stories from Africa and in Native American. There is this idea of, naming, and there's this idea of giving a name to things. We don't see that here. What creates the universe? Her smile. She smiles, and then everything appears. Now, it's interesting because I'm going to read this a little. This is actually from an entry on Mahadevi that I thought was interesting. It's a Wikipedia entry, this particular one. Not that that's my not normally my go-to source, but this is interesting because it talks about the Devi Gita. It says, it suggested that before incarnating as Parvati, she appeared to the king Himalaya and revealed divine eternal knowledge to him. She explained herself in the words of the Vedas as having neither beginning nor end. She is the only eternal truth. The whole universe is her creation. She is the only victor and manifestation of victory itself. So the reality is there is nothing but Kushmanda. Okay? She is a manifested, unmanifested, and transcendent divinity. So she's both manifest and she's immanent and transcendent, as we would say. She then displayed her scarcely seen form to him. Satyaloka was located on her forehead. The created universe were her hairs. The sun and moon were her eyes. In her ears were the 4 directions. The Vedas were her words. Death, affection, and emotion were her teeth. Maya was manifested by her smile. Aha. Okay. Goddess Parvati as Kushmanda gives birth to the universe in the form of a cosmic age, which manifests as the universe. Ultimately, the Adishakti herself is the zero energy which exists even after destruction of the universe and before its creation. Okay? So when you're talking Adishakti, Adiparashakti, this is the, this is the absolute supreme primal, like I said, ground zero, as it were, of creation and destruction, really. Because as we see, Kushmanda not only creates the light and the suns, but she creates Mahakali, she creates Mahasarasvati, and also Mahalakshmi. And this is another form. These are another manifestations of this Tridevi, which we normally think of Tridevi as Durga, Lakshmi, and Sarasvati. Okay. And in this way, we can think of Kushmanda then as a form of Ma Durga, which, why she's part of the Navadurgas, these manifestations of Durga or / Parvati. Okay. I know this can be very confusing for Western listeners because we say, well, which is she? Is she Shakti? Is she Parvati? Is she Kali? They're all the same. That's the whole point. They all actually they represent different aspects. They represent perhaps different phases of what we would think of as the yugas or the timelines as we perceive them, and the way and the drama that takes place within this world. But her smile is Mahamaya, who's often seen as a separate deity. So in this way, she creates the illusion of the universe, because Maya is associated with an illusion, because the reality is that there is nothing but Kushmanda. Okay? There is a point in the Chandipat where Durga she manifests all of these different forms. She manifests the matrikas in particular, the Ashtamatrikas, and they, have their weapons and they fight the various, Asuras that attack them. And the Asuras, though, are represented as thoughts. Okay? Now here's a big difference that we're going to notice between East and West. Because in the Western view, what do we have? We have God, you have this god, presumably this male god, or a collection of gods that are associated with this male deity. And they're saying words. Now, if you remember the Gospel of John, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was made flesh. That's the opening line of the book of John. Now, the word, logos, okay? In the Western world, everything we perceive, our consciousness is logos-driven. Okay? Because that's the tradition. Not because that's necessarily the reality, but that's the tradition we're raised in. If I tell you to think about a reality that is outside of logos, outside of words, you can't do it. Even me sitting here talking to you, trying to get out of that realm of rationality into that realm of just not even, images, but also just experience. Just experience everything as it is without having to evaluate or analyze it. That just seems really weird. You would think, well, why wouldn't you want to analyze it, right? But when we're talking about primal experience, you're talking about, you have to get outside of language. This is all primordial pre-language, because the reality of everything is beyond language. Okay? Not in the Western tradition. In the Western tradition, everything comes into being through language. Okay? So it's a very, very different way of thinking about these things. And I feel like it's not better illustrated here, this difference between, like when I teach religion, I talk about the difference in the concepts of God or deity between Eastern and Western. And again, Joseph Campbell probably said it best when he said, in the East, there's the insight that transcends duality, and in the West, it's the insight of duality. Okay, so we experience everything as separate, and interestingly, the one thing that really messes with us, probably the thing that causes us the most suffering in Western culture, is separateness, is our perceived separateness, whether it's separateness from a social group. Separateness from, needing to belong somewhere, right? Needing to fit in, needing to belong. The difficulties of what we think of as abandonment or rejection, whether it be by family, whether it be by friends, whether it be by a social group, or whether it be, just isolation through loss. Because within that particular system, death is considered to be something unnatural. So it creates suffering. In the other, as you can see, the goddess of the cremation grounds and death is created by the same goddess who brings the sun and light into the world. She's one of the great goddesses is the goddess of death. That's all part and parcel of the whole picture of life. So, this creation that she has, this cosmic egg, and again, the cosmic egg is prevalent in a lot of mythologies. We also see this idea in, you have this kind of idea even within Orphic thinking, or also there's the myth of Ophion in the Greek tradition. It's sort of an alternate story where there is the there's the snake, who mates and creates the cosmic egg and wants to take credit for creating the cosmic egg, and then the female half of that, that gets annoyed and kind of like tramples him because, because it's this idea of, there's this idea, that this, that there of this, this, in this case, the snake is sort of the masculine part of the equation, trying to take credit for what's created through the feminine. So we see here again that this Adishakti, this Kushmanda, is in fact, the reality behind everything. Okay. And that is something that cannot be comprehended through logos. Obviously, I'm saying this to you in words right now, right? We work through the intellect because that's what we have. And it's not to say that intellect is not needed or not useful. Obviously, we have this, for a reason. It's another tool that we have. But we tend to overrate the tool. And this is why our minds tend to overtake things. Meditation is about trying to, make the mind shut the F up, because that's the problem that we have. I'll tell you, it's a problem I have. I wake up every morning and my mind is running at 100 miles an hour. I get up and then I drink coffee, which doesn't make it any better. It probably makes it worse. But but I have to go through this, and so if I have ideas for things that I'm doing, whether it be for this podcast, for classes that I'm doing, for media posts I want to put up, for, just general organization of my life, story ideas, I write them down first thing in the morning and then just try to push them away and take some time to shut all of that up. Because there's a lot to be gained from that stillness. There's an aspect of Devi called Nischala, and which actually, weirdly, as I've said, it happens to be the name that Mata Amritananda Mayi gave to me. It was Nischala. But Nischala is a relevant concept here. You don't tend to see it in the stotras or the prayers, except in the 1,000 names of Kali. But this is the idea of this complete stillness. And that stillness that is sort of at the center of things. And you can think of Kushmanda as being connected to this as well, because the heart chakra is the center. It's the center of your being. Okay. It's not the head. People always talk about, everything coming from your head, your soul, your thoughts, no, it comes from the heart in this view. In other cultures, it may come from other places, but there's this idea that the heart is actually the center of your being. And that is what, she represents. And, and interestingly, if you work, like I do a lot of work in, one-to-one healing fields, whether it be Reiki therapy, whether I work with tarot, whether I do astrology. But when I do any kind of work with the chakras, okay, and chakra, by the way, is just a word for wheel. So it's this thing it's supposed to be this disc that more or less spins, with the energy, being either, sometimes they spin too fast, sometimes they're too slow. They're blocked by something. So it's the idea of, when one works on chakras, they're clearing, they want the correct amount of spin to be in each of the areas. And by the way, there's more than the 7. You're supposedly millions of chakras, but it's just, those are the ones that we focus on because they're the largest. And what I often find is that heart chakra is the main place of difficulty when working on clients, no matter what their other problem is. They could come to me with, headaches, stomach aches, hip pain, whatever it is. It's amazing to me how much manifests in the heart. Because again, that sense of separation, that sense of suffering and isolation, that is really, and again, in looking at it from this particular Hindu perspective, is actually an illusion. You're not actually separate. You're not actually separated from anything or anybody. Okay? We talk about putting up boundaries when we feel that we're threatened or that there's toxic influences on us, right? And this is the way that we see things. This is why we have this idea of distance and measurement. This is why I think the idea of, again, back to the Genesis myth of, the God dividing things into days. And, this measurement is the way that we have order and that we have control. Okay, so you have this very orderly way of conceiving of the universe, of making a pattern out of this Maya, after this grand illusion, that it has a form. It takes a form. It has a picture. But the reality beyond that is not, doesn't have that neat, rational, orderly form. one of the things, this is not really a side note, even though it may sound like one. When I read for people, one of the things that I've noticed now that I do more professional reading for people, especially if I'm doing intuitive or empathic reading, is that I run into people who are either, one of the two S's, as I call it, scared or skeptical. And when I experience that from somebody, it's like if I sit down and I pull cards for them. Now, mind you, these are people who have paid readings, and my readings are not really, any credible reader is not cheap, okay? But it's, maybe I shouldn't say that. There's probably some people who do offer cheaper readings. All depends on where you are. So anyway, what I find is that I will run into people who think that, as, first of all, they refer to you as psychic. And I'm like, well, I don't refer to myself as psychic. But just assuming that that's the way they feel about what you're able to tell. The reason I'm able to tell things about people when I pull the cards is because I'm seeing what the symbols are on the cards, and I'm also getting information from them. And I'm getting that because there's not really a separation between us. There's not, naturally speaking, there's a connection. I mean, you'll even find references to this in neuroscience too, where they're talking about this kind of consciousness as a network rather than each person sort of having their own individual consciousness. There, it's part of a larger system. And, and it's in this way that, it's easy for me, the experiments people do, for example, in telepathy or things like that, or, some of those weird things where you think about somebody and then they call you, the way in which consciousness can be connected. And what the cards do is they provide a symbol, they provide a picture. They don't, not necessarily, there might be words on the card, but the picture is what's important. And I can look at the picture and I can get a sense of what it means. Now, that doesn't mean I automatically know everything. A lot of times when people talk about this kind of work, they think, oh, you as the reader are sitting down and looking into my eyes and you can read all my thoughts like the scroll at the bottom of the, the news screen. And that's not how any of this works, because it's not logos driven. It's image driven. So it's like, okay, I have this image. This is the association I have with this image. So what, help me here. Like a lot of times there has to be a dialogue about things. If I read for somebody and I see something about a relationship and I see the Nephthys symbol in the Egyptian in the legal house, because I do everything by astrological house, I look at that and I say, I can read that one of two ways. If you're in a new relationship, it's probably just going to be a temporary relationship. If you're in a much more serious relationship, or you're going to get married or whatever, then, you don't have money for the wedding yet, do you? Two different things. They mean two different things, depending. But, I only see the image. You have to help me with the interpretation in your life as to telling me what that means. But people are either scared because they're afraid you're going to tell them they're going to die or something, I don't know. Or they're, or that they're going to lose something. Again, there's a fear that there's going to be separation there. Or they just are skeptical and think that the way they have to approach it is to completely cut you out. So, and then of course I usually go home with a headache after that because, I'm not going to fight to break down your doors if you close them. So, anyway, I don't mean that to be such a long digression into that, but the point is that particular world, that world of symbol, that world that's kind of outside of time, the way that we see things, the nice, neat, orderly, rational way we see things in this view is an illusion. And the reason that one can do things or get outside of timelines or see the future, quote unquote, see the future or whatever, which again, that's malleable and changeable as well. But is because there's this underlying connection that's connected through these symbols, where myth comes from, that's where religion comes from. It's all of these things, the kind of symbolism that appears in your dreams. Your dreams seem really weird, but when you're in the dream, it all seems pretty normal, right? It's in a different type of consciousness. And what we see here is this, this more primordial type of consciousness that predates or is before this kind of word driven. And again, that's what we see in Hinduism. We don't see language until Lord Shiva brings, through a thunderstorm, usually brings language into the, where language becomes part of, society. And that's where you'll have the words, and that's where you'll have the Vedas, and that's where you have the influence of, say, Saraswati, this idea of intellectual learning. Okay. So this is, Kushmanda is a very interesting deity to meditate on for that reason. She represents the sun, and there's also kind of a suggestion there that if her smile is what, brings things into creation, that creates the cosmic egg, and that if she is the Shakti that powers the sun, there's definitely a sense that these things that we see in light, we always think of light as dispelling darkness and bringing us clarity. But sometimes light blinds us too. It's not necessarily, just because you're seeing something in the light doesn't necessarily mean you're seeing it as it is. Okay? And it's an important thing to think about with this, is that, you can, just because something is illuminated doesn't necessarily mean you have clarity on it. And I'm not even talking like moonlight illumination, which is what we tend to traditionally see like in tarot. Sun represents that clarity, whereas moonlight's kind of like, you still got to follow your intuition. You can't really see it. It's suggesting that hidden or that primordial knowledge that is beyond the, that what we see with the bright light may also be an illusion. Philosophically, this is the way in which logical positivism is, disproven. This idea that if I can't see it with, if I can't experience it with one of my five senses, then it isn't real. And that's been largely disproven because there's a whole sections of reality that have absolutely nothing to do with, with that. They have nothing to do with what I can see in front of me. There's plenty of examples of how you can be fooled by, how there's, trompe-l'oeil, there's tricks of the eye. There's, there's all kinds of ways in which we can deceive ourselves about what we're seeing right in front of ourselves. So, light, logos, rationality, clarity is not always what it appears to be. And I feel that's another message of the Kushmanda stories. So let me see what else I have for you on this subject. Now let me just mention briefly the, I want to find the, there's the idea of the siddhi, which is also bestowed by Kushmanda. Okay, so there are usually 8 siddhis that are referred to in, and these are the powers that one may obtain through tantra, through certain practices. It's generally the orthodox view is that attaining to a siddhi is, it can potentially lead you astray if you're too focused on gaining power in a particular area, because a siddhi is a power. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit more about them with the last Navadurga called Siddhartri. But there's the anima. There's the mahima, the lagima, the garima, the prapti, the prakmya, the sitva, and there's vasitva. Okay. Actually, that one was prakamya. I'm looking at it the wrong way from this angle. So anima being able to reduce one's body to the size of an atom. The mahima to expand one's body. So anima is reduction. Mahima is to expand your body. Lagima is to become weightless or lighter than air. Garima is to become heavy. Prapti to access any place in the world. Prakamya is to realize whatever you desire. Sitva, the ability to force influence upon someone. And vasitva, to control the material world or natural forces. Okay, so these are the siddhis that can be bestowed by Kushmanda, and that's not surprising because those particular what do all those have to do? Those all have to do with a lot of these with material reality, with size, with shape. This has to do with measurement, right? How heavy is something? How light is something? And when it comes to desires, a lot of these are desires that are connected with the world and with worldly desires. Okay, so it's having power over, the wealth creation in your life, whatever that would mean, and of course your ability to influence others. That kind of manipulation. that can come through Siddhi. So these are the powers that are associated with Kushmanda in particular. So so it's, so again, so we see this idea of these powers, and these powers in a certain sense, at least according to that same idea, are illusory. They're almost the powers that you think of if you've ever tried to create an egregore, for example. The way in which you would manipulate whatever that is, give it a certain form and a certain size and a certain shape and a certain density. And you would use that power, you would build that power up with the power of thought, usually to manifest or to gain influence over somebody or over a situation. Although that takes a lot of time because thought energy, a lot of these do end up taking place in the mind. But of course, we see that the message there is that, what you're doing, you can do this because you're basically just creating another illusion, is what you're doing. Illusion that may have what we think of as real world effects, but part of this is that the real world is not necessarily all that real, not in that sense. Obviously there are forces and there are powers in existence, but the way that our minds understand it is extremely limited. And the things that are really real are things that can only be experienced and that are beyond thought. So that's that is what I think the message is that we have in looking at Kushmanda Devi. And and she's, so again, like most of these goddesses, she's extremely powerful. And with any deity that is extremely powerful, you can have these very, very benevolent and helpful aspects. But as we see, she's also connected, she's connected as much to death as she is to life because she creates the Tridevi. And she is, and the Tridevi, as we have seen throughout the different Hindu writings, scriptures, epics, the Tridevi can be very benevolent and bestow, abundance and good things. The Tridevi and help you along your path. The Tridevi can also destroy everything in front of you. Usually though, it's destroying something that has become toxic or has outlived its usefulness in some way. And also so we also see within this world, light and darkness both have a place, and not just day and night. Light and darkness have a place. There's recently I was working with my religion students on the concept of theodicy, or the problem of evil. And the problem of evil only exists in monotheism, because there is an assumption that God, that the singular God, the same one in the Bible, is all good and all powerful and sees everything, and if God's got all of this power, and that, but is entirely 100% omnibeneficent, totally good, then you have questions to answer about the presence of evil. And of course, normally the way the religion says, well, it's you because you're the sinful little, whatever. It's your fault, and it's your, God was kind enough to give you free will and you mucked it up. And, so now, of course, then there's all this guilt and shame and separation that goes along with that too, which does fit into the paradigm of the stories. So, so again, for the Western listener, who's not familiar with Tantra, or not familiar with, or only sees Hinduism as something, they're so used to this this monotheistic ethical God that Hinduism seems really weird to them. This is another part of this. This is this idea that, the universe created with all of these things, with life, with death. Destruction and decay is as much a part of things as abundance and prosperity and life. These are all part and parcel of the same thing, and all of them in some sense are illusory. That doesn't mean that you need to say, well, everything's fake and I'm going to withdraw from life. That's not what that means. It means that oftentimes the things, especially the things that cause you sorrow, are caused because you have overthought them. You have overblown the importance of your rationality, which you can't help it. It's the culture that It's European and American culture, and it's spread elsewhere. And that particular, and so that worldview, it's very difficult to try to, because anytime you try, okay, now you're trying to use thought to control the situation again, and that's not exactly what the point is. The point is to get beyond thought, and to the down to the pure experience, if you will, that isn't that just allows everything to be as it is without dealing with thought. And unless you've actually had the experience, that's a really difficult thing to conceive of. When we talk about no thing, I remember one of the popes, I think it was Pope John Paul II, had talked about how religions like Hinduism or Buddhism, how terrible it was that they talked about, there just being nothing. And I'm like, no, they didn't say nothing. They said no thing. It's two different ideas. No thing. Or what you're talking about is beyond these forms and these things that we see. There's, the force behind that, the reality behind that, the Shakti behind that. It takes on a form, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what it is, any more than looking at a religious statue says, oh, that's what the god looks like. In Hinduism, the statues all look really, may look very strange, multiple arms and, strange colors and extra eyes. And it's because they're basically saying the gods are not like you. Okay, these are forces that are not like you. And in the kind of limited way that our mind works, these are images that are meant to prompt, the different weapons that they hold, the different mudras that they put their hands in, will tell you something about the aspect or the qualities of that particular deity. And all of them, even the most ferocious ones, usually have an abhaya mudra, which is the hand position that says, fear not. So in other words, they're not anything to be afraid of. They're part and parcel of everything that is. And really, certainly the way our societies are going, in European countries and America and different places, that are what I'll call quote unquote Western influenced, given how authoritarian things seem to be coming around the world, it would be good to, a lot of that comes when we are afraid and we feel that we need some singular strong person to come in and kind of take over and control everything and set it to right, to save us in some way. And it would be good to remember that's, that idea, that thing that you are afraid of is probably something you don't need to be afraid of. It's this idea of fear not. Don't be afraid of life no matter what it throws at you. Because, life and death are part of cycles, and, they potentially can be, they're real in some sense, and they're completely illusory in another. So when you get too caught up in your head and start taking things too seriously, that's where you need to take that step back. Okay, that's, I think, all I'm going to say for this week. I want to thank you all again very much for listening. You can find all of my work on Chthonia.net. As I've mentioned many times, I'm a one-woman show, so between that and my life, coaching / tarot / Reiki / holistic practices, and then my teaching that I do, I don't always update. I try to update certain things like social media. I try to update Patreon. I try to update certain things fairly regularly, but sometimes I'm a little slow with it because I just have so many things going on. So apologies for that. I try not to ignore anybody in any particular situation. And I'm trying to keep things, as I'm working on things, trying to keep things fresh and current. But Chthonia.net is my main website for this podcast and also for my writings and for my School of Scholars of the Borderland. If you are interested in supporting my work, my creative work, patreon.com/Chthonia is the place where you can potentially do that. I do record extra podcasts every month, and of course, patrons, when I create new works and so forth, they're usually the ones who will get first crack at seeing that work, and also get first input on things like episodes and and other things. Anything created to my work, any kind of suggestions and so forth. Patreon is where I tend to look first, if there's anything that comes from there. My social media, Chthonia Podcast, 2 words on Facebook, 1 word on Instagram and Twitter. And with that, thanks very much for listening. Thank you again to my patrons, and until next time.